Welcome. I want to thank you all again for coming to the Thunderbird School of Global Management for this event. We are honored and delighted to be able to host conversations like this that are so critical for our very important partnership and relationship. Thunderbird has been around for 75 years, first as an independent school in Glendale, and became a part of ASU in 2015. We are future forward and future ready at the intersection of the global and the digital, equipping leaders to create the industries and the opportunities and the ecosystems of the future. We fully embrace the world. And we are so grateful to have the opportunity to welcome you to our global forum so we can truly have this conversation. And I would like to introduce Mr. Ruben Alvarez, who is going to lead us into our next part of this symposium.
Thank you, Dean. As mentioned, my name is Ruben Alvarez. I'm the managing partner of Molera Alvarez, and I'd like to welcome all of you here to listen to our keynote speaker. But before we do that, I want to recognize a couple of the consuls that we have with us, recognize them again. The Consul General of Mexico in Phoenix, Jorge Mendoza, and the Consul of Tucson, Rafael Barcelo. Thank you for your presence. As you've heard from some of today's presenters, U.S. Mexico cross-border trade plays an important role in the economic growth of our two countries. The trade relationship between the U.S. and Mexico is not only significant in that it impacts the lives and livelihoods of millions of Americans and Mexicans through job creation, but it can also foster innovation and technology advancements in our border region through investment opportunities. This is why forums such as today's are helpful in our ongoing effort to gain information and a better understanding of what is required to enhance and strengthen this bilateral relationship. Today's keynote speaker understands that the key to capitalizing on these opportunities is by building trust, cooperation, and communication between the public and private sector leaders of our respective countries. Roberto Velasco Alvarez holds a master's degree in public policy from the University of Chicago, where he was editor-in-chief of the Chicago Policy Review and also interned in the office of the mayor. He also holds a law degree from the Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico City. After the presidential elections of 2018, he was invited by then Secretary of Foreign Affairs Marcel Ebrard to support the 2018 transition process. Roberto has extensive experience working in different levels of government, from local government, working with the Mexico City, to legislative experience, working at the Legislative Assembly of the Federal District, and also held a position within the Ministry of Economy. From December 2018 to June 2020, he also served as the General Director of Social Communication at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and over the last couple of years has been serving in the Office of the Secretary of Foreign Affairs as the Chief Officer for North America, where he helps manage the relationship between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. So please help me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Roberto Velasco.
Thank you very much, Ruben. Good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you in this very important event that is working to create a balanced and sustainable development for border communities, particularly in the Arizona-Mexico region. I would like to thank Arizona State University and Rodriguez Dávalos Abogados for the invitation to be part of this forum. Your efforts in fostering dialogue and closeness between Mexico and Arizona are admirable, especially at a time where global challenges underscore the relevance of enhancing global cooperation. Particularly, I would like to extend a warm greeting to Charla Griffy-Brown, Director General, Dean, and Professor of Global Digital Transformation in Thunderbird School of Global Management at SAU, and Ruben Alvarez, Managing Partner at Molera Alvarez firm. I would also like very especially to thank Jesus Rodriguez for the invitation. He has been following up on this very adamantly. I'm very happy to be here. Mate, thank you as well for the invitation. Great to see many friends here, including our consuls in Phoenix and in Tucson. And also, let me try to take us a little bit first apart from the Arizona-Mexico equation and talk more generally about what is going on in Mexico, what is going on in the bilateral relationship, and maybe in the end I'll come back to Arizona-Mexico. And I'll do this because I'm here with a lot of specialists in Arizona-Mexico relations. So I feel I have a better opportunity to impress you by going to what is my actual specialty, which is U.S. Mexico relations. So let me start first with where are we in Mexico? You know, we are at a very important historic moment. We are a few days from the end of the administration of President López Obrador, 24 days, if I remember correctly, not that I'm counting. And we will have the first female president in the history of Mexico, which is obviously something very momentous, something that, of course, we celebrate, and certainly is part of a process of transformation in our politics. 25 years ago, probably nobody would have thought that was possible. And now not only we will have a female president, but we have 50% of female legislators, both in the Senate and in the Chamber of Deputies. And we have the largest number that we've had in our history of female governors in cities as important as Mexico City, in states as traditionally conservative as Chihuahua, and many other places of the country. So certainly something to think about, to celebrate, and to highlight how Mexico has had the capacity to very rapidly change, to very rapidly respond to a new configuration of our society, not just in terms of gender, but also in many other ways. You know, we were a closed economy 40 years ago. We are now a country that is heavily integrated with the rest of the world, particularly with North America. We were a very different democracy, a very flawed democracy only 25 years ago. And now I would say we are a thriving democracy, very competitive, where you have a party now that was created just a few years ago in 2013, if I remember correctly. We founded Morena. And now Morena has won majorities in the two houses, the presidency, and a majority of governorships. That tells you not that there's a new hegemony being created, as some people want to portray in the press, but rather that we have a very competitive democracy that allows very rapid changes when the preferences of the citizens change. And of course, nobody should take for granted that those preferences will remain the same way. Of course, there is right now a government that is very popular, that enjoys a lot of support from the citizens of our country. But in order to keep being so, we need to keep delivering results. What happened during these 6 years? Well, we had a very important reduction in poverty. According to the most recent data by the World Bank, over 9 million Mexican citizens left poverty in this administration. That is huge. And that also helps to explain why this government has so much support from the Mexican society. We had an expansion in trade, mainly with the United States and Canada. In nominal terms, if you compare 2018 to 2023, there was an expansion of 40% of trade between Mexico and the United States, which is the biggest expansion since NAFTA was first implemented in the 90s. And that is obviously very, very important. Obviously, if you take into consideration inflation, these years we've had quite a few. The number is probably a little bit closer to 20%, but it's still a very important expansion in trade. We also have had a new security strategy. It is the main, and it remains the main challenge of Mexico to deal with violence in our country, to deal with organized crime that is bringing drugs to the United States, that is threatening Mexican society, that is creating violence in our communities, that is extorting businesses in our country. However, we've been able to create, for the first time in the history of Mexico, a force with a national presence, which has been one of the main problems of our country, that we didn't have a national presence of security authorities in our country. And the National Guard has achieved that. Of course, there are still many challenges, and I understand that the next administration wants to improve the capacity of the government, which I believe this is huge, this is very substantial, to investigate crime, to create intelligence and to bring those crimes to justice and to bring down impunity by doing so. So I am very hopeful that the National Guard, together with this new approach on intelligence and prosecutorial capacities, will help us to keep bringing down the number of homicides, that will help us rein on this new and very difficult issue of extortions, and that will help us keep working with the United States on what we all know is a major threat to our societies, which is fentanyl. I was just talking to someone in our consulate about fentanyl. This is a game changer in every possible way in the drug market. We went from marijuana, which was a substance that, you need a lot of space to grow the plants, the marijuana plants. It's very visible. You can see it from the sky, from an airplane, from a satellite now. And obviously to transport it, it is very noticeable because it's big, it's smelly, it's very easy to detect. Then we turned our attention to cocaine, which was not coming from Mexico. It was coming from South America because the plant that they use to create cocaine is not present in our country. It grows only in Colombia, in Peru, in Bolivia, in other countries. So obviously bringing something all the way down from South America to North America also has a series of logistical implications that the governments were able to confront as time went by. But now with fentanyl, what we have is a substance that is extremely potent in a way that makes the quantities that you need very, very, very small. And since these quantities are so small, it is extremely difficult to detect. And it is also extremely easy to produce. You hear a lot about precursors, but the reality is that the organized crime is using now precursors. And some of these substances are used also widely in the pharmaceutical industry, in the cosmetics industry. So certainly these are not substances that we can easily control or forbid, even less. So of course, this is a major challenge. It's something completely different to what we've seen in the past. A substance that is cheap, hard to detect, easy to smuggle, and that can very easily kill people. So of course, we have been trying to work with the U.S. administration to rein on this. It's not easy. It's not what we were used to. The supply chains are completely different. They involve a lot of different companies in the two countries that sometimes are doing actual legal work. So it's a completely different scenario. But the next administration is also committed to continue this work and to keep doing things like what we've done with COFEPRIS and the Secretary of the Navy, this administration, which was to create a monitoring system for different substances in our country, an intelligence system. It's called CISUS. And basically what this system does is that we are constantly monitoring the normal quantities of a certain substance that is being used by the legal industry in Mexico. And if we suddenly see any spike on the imports or on the movement of these substances in Mexico, that brings up an alarm in the system, and it obviously creates an investigation in Mexico. So we will continue to keep doing things like this. It will not become an easier problem. It will continue to be a problem that will require a lot of attention, a lot of energy, a lot of resources, but I believe everyone in Mexico is committed to continue this work. Obviously, on the economic front, the new administration will face a completely different reality. When we came to the government, and I remember this very well, in January of 2021, yes, we started our conversations with the Biden administration, and a few months later we went to Washington with President López Obrador for the first trilateral meeting of President López Obrador, President Biden, and Prime Minister Trudeau. And President López Obrador, the Secretary of the Treasury, Rogelio Ramírez, and some others, we were pitching to the United States, to the companies, the idea of what is now called nearshoring, or friendshoring, or ally-shoring, or however you want to call it, but we were pitching the idea. And now we are in a very different world. Companies are trying to come to this region, and we are actually not pitching the idea, but now we are in a position where we are playing catch-up in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the different needs that the companies have on human resources, on energy, which is obviously something very important for companies to be able to open new plants. So the new administration will come in a moment of huge opportunity, and certainly what they've been campaigning on, what they've been preparing for, is to take all the appropriate measures and all the policy decisions to support this process. The new administration has been working for months on all the plans that have to do with nearshoring, with infrastructure, and to make sure that this process can continue to benefit greatly our country. The first 6 months of this year were a record high in the history of Mexico in terms of foreign direct investment. So if we continue on this path, of course, we will see many new jobs in Mexico, a lot of wealth creation, and now something that happened in this administration was that the minimum wage in Mexico was greatly increased, something that economists in the past administrations, and I come from the University of Chicago, which, as you can imagine, is not the most progressive, but economists were saying you can't raise the minimum wage without creating a domino effect in the economy and bringing inflation up in a way that will destabilize prices and create poverty. And some of us were saying that is complete nonsense. There's no evidence to support that view, but unfortunately it was a consensus view in Mexico for decades. And the minimum wage became a wage that was way below the poverty line, way below the hunger line. It wasn't even enough to purchase basic needs for a person, for a family. So what this administration did was to increase that salary. This domino inflation effect did not happen. We have had some inflation in the past years, as everybody else in the world, because of supply chains, because of all the different problems that the pandemic caused. But this domino effect did never materialize. But what did happen is that the increase in the minimum wage brought up all the other wages. So a lot of people now, not just the ones that are making the minimum wage, but a lot of people are making more money in the country. And that, of course, creates a different wealth distribution. So this time, unlike what happened in the 90s, if there's a new wave of investments in our country, there will be a better distribution of the wealth that is created by this investment. So that is also something very important. And it was part of the vision of the USMCA that this administration continued to negotiate and finally implemented during our administration. So certainly something very important to take into consideration, and something also that explains, again, why the government is popular, because you have people now that are out of poverty, and you have a lot of people that are making more money with their work than they were doing before. And not only they're making more money, they're making enough money to provide sustenance to their family that is according to basic human dignity. So some things to celebrate and to think about for our country, and that will be important in the years to come. Now, of course, we're still at a moment of change in Mexico. We're still at a moment of uncertainty. We just had an election, and there's a new confirmation of our legislature. Morena now holds a majority in the two houses and a supermajority in the Chamber of Deputies. The party is one senator short to have a supermajority in the Senate. And as you probably have heard in the news, there's a discussion ongoing on a judicial reform and another series of reforms that will be important for our country. I understand that some of these initiatives create uncertainty. However, let me bring you back 6 years if you want to have a little less uncertainty. You know? When President López Obrador won, we were hearing all the same arguments that we're hearing now. Mexico is going to turn into Venezuela. The democracy in Mexico is at peril. We will see an outflow of FDI from Mexico. The relationship with the United States is going to be severely damaged by López Obrador. None of that materialized. Our democracy is still strong. We received very important investments. We had a very strong relation with the United States and a very strong collaboration with the United States, and this all will continue. Of course, there might be changes down the line. The election of judges is an important change. It's not an entire change in our laws and how justice is administered, because sometimes I read as if this was going to completely disrupt the legal system, and that's not the case. It's a change in how the judges, the magistrates, the ministers are appointed, and of course, everybody can have their own opinion on that. This has been a discussion in many other countries, including the United States, for centuries. There was a discussion by the founding fathers of this country regarding the election of judges, and at some point, federal judges were elected in the United States. But certainly, it's not something that is going to cause a complete breakdown of the Mexican economy or the bilateral relation or of legal certainty in our country. Those who were optimistic in 2018 ended taking advantage of many opportunities in our country. Those who were optimistic ended having, a much more, let me put it elegantly, we were right in the end. And I invite you to be optimistic this time again. I understand that change sometimes is something that creates anxiety in us, but Mexico is a big country, is a country with a society that is heavily politicized, it's a country with a healthy democracy, with freedom of press, and you should be sure that in the end, Mexico's democracy will be strengthened and that Mexico's economy will continue to flourish. Now, let me turn a little bit to the bilateral relation. Of course, we've had a few weeks with a lot of fireworks, given the political context in Mexico and the political context in the United States. It was obvious since the beginning of the year, or since before, that we were going to have a rough year in terms of how things are portrayed in the media and with the election in the two countries, with a transition in Mexico, etc. And yes, in the past few weeks, we've had a series of expressions of protest by our president regarding some of the comments that were made by the U.S. ambassador to Mexico, who's my friend. However, I do believe that the United States and every country needs to be respectful of the political processes on the other countries. Naturally, these are important decisions, but are decisions of the Mexican people, and the Mexican society is having that discussion. However, that does not mean these expressions of protest, these expressions of pause in the relationship with the U.S. Embassy, does not mean that there is a breakdown in the relation between Mexico and the United States. We continue to have high-level communication at many different channels with the White House, with the Department of State, with the Department of Homeland Security, with all of our different partners in the United States. And cooperation has continued on the many different areas that are important for the two countries. I mentioned the economy and the USMCA. There's also all the work that we do on migration, which is also fundamental for the two countries. Because what has happened in the past few years, and sometimes I'm afraid that in the US, it has not been deeply understood, and neither in Mexico, to be honest, what the very deep change that we saw in the past 6 years or 7 years on migration. Historically, what we had seen was Mexican migrants coming to the United States and the countries having a dialogue on that Mexican migration. However, starting a few years ago, that changed. We started seeing mainly migration from Central America, from Guatemala, from Honduras, from El Salvador, a little less from Nicaragua. But what happened after the pandemic was one of the deepest changes that we've seen in migration trends, or the deepest change that we've seen in migration trend, which was that what was known as the Darien Gap, which is this piece of jungle in South America, in the border between Colombia and Panama, is not a gap anymore. This jungle was considered so thick that it constituted a natural barrier between the countries of South America and the countries of Central and North America. It's actually the only part of the continent, the entire continent, that is not connected by what is known as the Pan American Road, because nobody wanted, obviously, to cut down the trees in this very thick jungle to build a road. At some point, Panama considered it, if I remember correctly, but it did not happen in the end. But this natural barrier, at some point, the smugglers, the people, they figured out a way to have ways of passing through it, through an area called Necoclí in Colombia, which connects with the, let's say, the thinner part of the Darien, the shortest route through the Darien. And they laid paths to walk across the Darien. So suddenly we had a change. Now we're not dealing with Central American migration, but with South American migration. We're dealing with people coming from Venezuela, Colombia, Brazil, Peru, and many other countries that were not the usual countries of origin. And there are different problems with each of these nationalities. Let me just give you one example so you understand why this is such a deep change. Venezuela won't accept the repatriation of their own citizens. So if any of the two countries, and a lot of people in the US tell me, why Mexico doesn't simply stop the Venezuelan migrants? Well, because we can't. We detain them for a migratory control process, but we can't hold a migrant over a certain period of time, because that is what our Constitution says, and the same happens in the United States. You cannot detain, imprison, or indefinitely detain a person simply for being a migrant. What you usually do is that you repatriate such person to their countries of origin. But with Venezuela, we can't do that, because Venezuela is having a very difficult conversation with the United States, and they figured out at some point that they could use this element as a pressure tool against the United States. And Nicaragua did something even bigger. Nicaragua decided to lift all the visa requirements that they had for every country in the world. So Nicaragua became a landing spot from people coming all over the planet, from all over the planet, en route to the United States. And when somebody from a country like, let's say, Eritrea in Africa comes to the door in Mexico, well, we don't even have an embassy in Eritrea. So there's certainly no way in which we can repatriate a person that is coming from a country like that. This is completely different from what we were facing in the past. Nicaragua at some point even figured out that they could profit from this trend. So now what they do is that they sell temporary visas that allow people to be in Nicaragua for 36 hours that you pay when you get to Nicaragua. And people, of course, simply come in, pay, and then take a route towards Mexico and the United States. So this is a very, very, very big change that we've faced in the past few years. And it has taken a lot of energy from the two countries, a lot of resources from the two countries, a lot of engagement with countries all over the world and, of course, all over the region to figure out what to do with this migration. Because, of course, some people believe that there's a right to migrate, that there's a right to have freedom of movement. And to an extent, I agree. However, all countries need to have some forms of control of migration so it doesn't become chaotic, so it doesn't endanger the migrants themselves, so it doesn't create opportunities for organized crime to create new businesses, as we've seen that has happened in the past few years with human smuggling and human trafficking. And of course, we need to make sure that societies are prepared to receive the migrants. We can't, what we've seen in the past few years is that when a city is not prepared to receive the migrants, then it can turn into something very dramatic, as it happened in several cities in Mexico at many different points, in Tapachula, in Tijuana, in Ciudad Juárez, even in areas of Mexico City, and as it happened also in cities in Texas, in Arizona, in New York now, in Chicago, with everything that happened with the governor of Texas. So we've done this work. It has taken a lot of time, a lot of resources from the Mexican government, but we are committed to do so because we understand the importance of the partnership that we have with the United States, and we understand the need for the two countries to work together, because in the end, we will always be neighbors, we will always be next to each other. And something that I always say to help people think about the U.S. Mexico border, the U.S. Mexico border length is equivalent to the distance between Barcelona and Moscow. That is the size of the space we share. So there is no scenario, and people in the two countries really need to internalize this. There is no scenario, there is no way in which Mexico and the United States can not work together. We need to work together, and we will always need to work together. We will always need to have communication, simply because we share that space. And now, not only we share that space, we share almost $1 trillion of trade every year between the two countries. And I was telling this someday to Ken Salazar, it's the largest trading relationship between any set of two countries in the history of humanity. That is the size and the scope of what we're seeing between Mexico and the United States. And Mexico is the #1 place in the world where U.S. citizens live outside their own country. And well, all of you know that we have a huge community of Mexicans and Mexican Americans living in the United States. So all the things that connect us will always go deeper than any political context or any concrete issue that we're facing, any concrete tension that we're facing. Of course, that doesn't mean that we don't need to attend to those challenges that arise, but there is much more, and there will always be more connecting us than the issues that create friction between the two countries. and everybody in the Mexican government, in the current Mexican government, and in the next administration understands. Certainly President-elect Sheinbaum understands this very well, as President López Obrador did, and her team is also very much aware of all of these dynamics, including future Foreign Secretary Juan Ramón de la Fuente, and also someone who will play an important role, who's the future Secretary of the Economy, who will be in charge of the revision of the USMCA. Let me, and I have no idea how much more time I have, but let me try to end with a couple thoughts on what is next on the relationship, and also try to bring this a little bit to Arizona, Mexico. We will continue to face a challenge with migration, and I always want to say challenge, not problem. Migration is a challenge, it's not a problem, it's not negative in itself. Migration is simply a challenge that we need to tackle, hopefully in a better way every time. I think we are at a good moment right now. The numbers of irregular migrants has continued to drop in the past few months, and that's a good thing. The number, not just because there's less irregular migrants, but because regular migration to the United States and to Mexico is increasing. So this is a very positive equation: less irregular migration, more orderly migration. And that, of course, should always be the goal of the two governments. We will need to continue working on what I mentioned on security, and that will continue to be a big challenge for Mexico. The U.S. also, also plays, and I don't know if there's any water. No sé si me pudieran ayudar alguien con... Gracias, qué amables. My apologies, but I think I've spoken for too long. So the U.S. also plays a big part on the security equation. The guns that the cartels are using come from the United States, mainly from, so thank you so much. You're very helpful. The guns are coming from the United States, so we need to work on this together not just focusing on the drugs that are coming to the United States, but rather in the entire supply chain of the organized crime, and that includes the guns. And a lot of people in the U.S. don't like to hear that. And they say, well, you know, guns don't kill people. Well, I mean, fentanyl doesn't kill people either, you know. These things don't have motion in themselves. It's people always in the end who either kill themselves or kill other people, hurt their societies, their families themselves, of course. But we need to work together to tackle this whole ecosystem of organized crime that is affecting the two countries. And probably the third big challenge that we'll have in the next couple of years is the revision of the USMCA. My view is that Mexico's position needs to be that we shouldn't change the USMCA. It's a treaty that has been enforced for a very short period of time. So my view is that we shouldn't agree to move, you know, a comma in the treaty. We should try to make sure that we convince our friends in the United States that this is a treaty that is creating a lot of opportunities and a lot of trade and a lot of business for the three countries. We should work together to resolve any differences in the implementation of the treaty before, during, and after the revision, of course, but we shouldn't try to change a treaty that has been in place for such a short period of time. However, of course, the next administration has been working on a strategy for this, as the U.S. administration is doing so, as the Canadian government is doing so, and I'm sure that we'll get to a positive result. This, however, will be something very, very important for the Mexican government and to engage with the private sector, with NGOs, with the academia, because we all have a stake on having this treaty to continue to provide benefits for the three countries. And lastly, I'm very excited about Arizona. To hear about these investments on semiconductors is honestly something really amazing. What is happening here, I think, is something that we haven't seen before. To have suddenly such a big and exciting influx on investments in a state of the United States. And Mexico should be very smart about this, because Arizona has the particularity that it's a neighbor of Mexico. So we need to keep figuring out ways in which we can connect with what is going on in Arizona. Modernizing the border infrastructure is one of those ways. Making sure that we're talking with the companies that are coming here to see where there are opportunities to integrate in their supply chains. A lot of the experience that we have in Mexico can be very easily translated into what is going on here. We have a lot of experience in assembly, testing, and packaging of products related to semiconductors. So we can play a big role in the equation of Arizona. We can play a big role in helping to make the companies here more competitive and to integrate in a way that can really make sure that they outcompete Chinese, Taiwanese, Japanese, South Korean companies. So I'm sure that the next administration of Mexico will continue to work on this, as we've done in the past few years through the U.S. Mexico high-level economic dialogue and the U.S. Mexico CEO dialogue, and several other initiatives, including Plan Sonora, that is one of the initiatives that President López Obrador has also taken as a priority for his administration. So thanks for organizing this. Thanks for inviting me. And of course, as you can imagine, I have few days left of this administration, but I'm sure I'll continue to be around and I'll continue to be a friend of whatever initiative happens in the future between Arizona and Mexico. So thank you again. Sure. It's probably a bad idea, but I'll do it anyways. Okay, I think here's one. Okay.
Okay. My question is, you called a challenge for the migration. However, I am a journalist, and during the past few years, every single Central American or everyone who is coming from Mexico, the complaint, and it's not I don't see it as a challenge, it's more as an issue, is that they're being robbed either for what they identify as authorities or criminal groups or any other anyone in Mexico. So how are you guys attacking that? Because to me, it's not a challenge. I see migration as a challenge. I don't see this as a challenge. It's more of a problem.
It's a very important question that you're asking. When you have thousands of people crossing through a country trying to avoid detection, and in order to avoid detection, you are using either the less visible pathways or you're using human smugglers, you become an extremely vulnerable individual, family, or group, because by definition, you are trying to avoid being seen. And many of these people don't carry documents because they're planning to ask for asylum. Some of them are carrying false documents. Some of them are carrying no forms of communication with other people. So, of course, they become extremely vulnerable. That's why part of what we have been trying to do is to have less people going through our country to get to the United States irregularly. let me just briefly tell you about two initiatives that we've had with the Biden administration. The first one had to do with Cubans, Nicaraguans, Venezuelans, and Haitians. We had a very long series of conversations with the United States that ended in the creation of a humanitarian parole program that allows people to fly into the United States from their countries of origin after following a certain process, an online process, instead of going through Mexico, through the jungle, through the smugglers, et cetera, and all the dangers that we're talking about that are very real. The second initiative, and this is very recent, the U.S. created this application, this digital app called CBP-1, which allows migrants to apply for asylum in the United States and to get an appointment to continue their process of asylum claiming in the United States. So the U.S. was, the geo-fencing of this app was from the parallel 19 and north of the Mexican territory. So the parallel 19 is around Mexico City. So you couldn't use this app in southern Mexico. So what we asked the United States to do was change the geolocation of your app and allow people to apply from Tabasco and Chiapas, which are the two southernmost states of Mexico bordering Guatemala. And now the National Migration Institute, and for me this is major and it hasn't gotten a lot of coverage, maybe that's good, but this is very big for me. The INM has created a humanitarian corridor and is transporting the people who get a CBP appointment safely from Chiapas and Tabasco to the Mexican northern border, the U.S. southern border. So instead of having to use a smuggler or having to go through all these very dangerous routes that include, for example, running or trying to get in the upper parts of cargo trains, which is extremely dangerous, and I cannot tell you how many cases I've seen of people who have lost limbs of their lives in this process of boarding and getting off the trains. Instead of doing that, the INM, if you have a CBP appointment that is validated in the south, they will safely take you to the northern border. So that is the kind of thing that we're trying to do to avoid these perils. Okay? I think there's one back there.
Very good. Good afternoon. My name is Michael Muth. I just retired from the U.S. Foreign Service, however, the U.S. Department of Commerce and not the Department of State. And now I am teaching here at Thunderbird and teaching a course specifically on regional trade agreements. And so not surprisingly, USMCA has been a big topic of conversation. And so my question is, how has the Mexican economy or industry changed in the transition from NAFTA to USMCA? And also I have to say, spent many years in Chicago. Hope you enjoyed your time in Hyde Park.
I enjoyed the summers, not so much the rest of the year. And thank you for your question and for what you're doing is great. I hope to join you someday down the line teaching after a career in diplomacy. But what the USMCA did, the 2 or 3 big strategic changes, there were a lot of parts of the treaty that were simply updated, or things like digital trade that was included, that obviously did not exist as an issue back in the 90s when the treaty was originally negotiated. However, there were 2 big strategic changes. The first one was the inclusion of rules of origin in the auto industry. And that was a major change for our industry that made the industry very nervous. But the Mexican government actually viewed this very positively because basically what the rules of origin do is that they force companies to do less transshipment and to add more value to the vehicles that they are going or trying to import to the United States in Mexico. You need a higher component of added value in Mexico in those vehicles. So that, of course, creates resistance because it forces companies to make changes, investments. Sometimes, obviously, that changes your price structure, your cost structure. However, from our perspective, it has worked very well to promote investments in Mexico and to make sure, as it was the concern in the United States, that the imports that are brought through the USMCA are imports that are coming from Mexico and Canada and not from the country in the other side of the world. Well, the second big change, and I talked a little bit about this before, was the change in the labor part of the treaty. Basically, what a lot of people in the US and Canada felt was that Mexico was doing something that they called labor dumping, which was you have lower salaries and less protections for workers, and that is putting my workers in an unfair competition with Mexican workers. So we included for the first time in any commercial agreement, as far as I know, a chapter on labor provisions. And we created several new things there. The one was this rapid response mechanism that a lot of people don't like, but I think it has worked well. Only very few cases have gotten to an arbitration panel, and the one that did, Mexico won it, by the way. But most of them have been resolved friendly before they get to an arbitration panel. So that, for me, is a good mechanism because it promotes a friendly solution of controversies in the labor sector. Of course, there was also a negotiation regarding the increase in wages and the implementation of a labor reform in Mexico. That was already a plan of President López Obrador. And we've had a big change in that sense. We have a lot less sindicatos blancos, or I don't even know if there's an equivalent in the United States, but basically these were simulated unions that in reality were not unions, and they were able to say, oh yeah, these workers are unionized, but there was no real union behind that, but rather just a legal figure. So we have a lot less of those. We have a lot more union democracy now. We're having all these processes for the new unions to elect freely in a new process their leaders. We have a new system of courts in the labor space, because we had before this juntas de conciliación y arbitraje, another thing that I have no idea how to translate, but probably this conciliation, kind of like an arbitration board for labor disputes, but they had a presence of the companies, the government, the workers, and in reality, they didn't work very well and they were not independent. So we created a new system that is actually an independent court system that is a part of the judicial branch. So that was another important change. So all of this to say that what is happening in the labor sector in Mexico, what I talked about, the change in the minimum wages, the change in the acquisitive power, the increase in general salaries, has to do with the USMCA. It is related with the USMCA. So more investments, better salaries, better protection for workers. From my perspective, it is working very well for Mexico. And certainly, those were objectives of the United States as well. So I think the treaty is doing exactly what it was supposed to do: increase investment, increase trade, increase workers' protection, increase salaries, create a better distribution of wealth. So that is the answer, the short answer.